Allora mi sembra possiamo cominciare, no? Wishes to one and all gathered here in this hall and all those who are following online. I'm Henry, member of the Institute of Salesian History, Rome, here to facilitate this auspicious event of the presentation of the latest book by Reverend Father Thomas ANCHUKANDAM titled Theological Formation of Salesians in India with special reference to Christu Jyoti College, Bangalore, 1967 to 1976. I shall be introducing to you the resource persons, each of whom will have 20 minutes at their disposal to present the topic either in English or in Italian from their perspective. To begin with, may I invite Reverend Father Andrea Bozzolo, SDB, the Rector of the Salesian Pontifical University, Rome, to deliver the welcome address and to orient us towards the benefiting from the well-thought-out themes for the day, to be developed by the carefully chosen persons of competence. Just a word of introduction about Father Andrea. Apart from engaging in teaching theology, he is an established theologian who contributes to the field of theology currently through his regular scientific publications. I wish to name only the latest publication of his from the many of his works, La cultura affettiva, cambiamenti e sfide. Carissimo professore Don Andrea, a lei la parola.
Good afternoon. I am very pleased to greet you on the occasion of the presentation of this book by Father Thomas ANCHUKANDAM, Director of the Salesian Historical Institute. A warm greeting also to all those who are connected online, in particular to Father Ivo, Counselor for Formation. The book of Father Thomas presents the theological formation of the Salesians in India with special reference to Christu Jyoti College, Bangalore, which is an important university center aggregated to our Faculty of Theology. For this reason, the Salesian University is very grateful to Father Thomas for his work, which is interesting not only for a better knowledge of the congregation in India, but also for the study of the academic commitment of the Salesians. An academic institution always has a significant impact on the territory at the social and ecclesial level. Rereading its history allows us to understand its roots and plan for the future. Besides, I have a personal reason to be thankful. In fact, I plan to visit Christu Jyoti College this summer in August, and reading this book will be an excellent preparation for this visit. I therefore congratulate Father Thomas and wish him all the best for this book. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, dear Father Andrea, for your brief but very warm welcome extended to all of us. Let's prepare ourselves for the first talk of the day by Father Shaji Joseph Puikunal, SDB. He is an associate professor of Old Testament in the Faculty of Theology at the Salesian Pontifical University, Rome, since 2015, and is currently the director of the Institute of Spiritual Theology. Also a member of the Salesian Biblical Association and rector of one of the religious communities in the university campus here. Father Shaji completed his master's degree in sacred scripture at the Pontifical Biblical Institute of Rome and his doctorate in theology at the Pontifical University Angelicum, Rome. He was a professor at Sacred Heart College, Theological College, Shillong from 1998 to 2013 and has been a visiting professor to Christu Jyoti College, Bengaluru, India since 2004. He has edited several books and has published several scientific articles in the field of sacred scripture. I think Father Shaji is a reliable and apt person to enlighten us on the socio-political and religious context of Northeast India at the time of the arrival of the first Salesian missionaries. Welcome, dear Father.
Thank you for the introduction. And I'm really happy to make this short presentation of the socio-political and religious context of Northeast India at the time of the arrival of the first Salesian missionaries. We cannot talk about the theological formation of Salesians in India without having reference to the arrival of the first Salesian missionaries in India, particularly to the region of the Northeast. And for about 40 years or so, the theological formation was done in Shillong and, as the book would explain, in various places of India. And the point of arrival is Christ Jyoti College in 1967 with the beginning of the Theological College in Bangalore. The first group of 11 Salesian missionaries arrived in Shillong, the summer capital of the entire Northeast India, on the 13th of January 1922. I am actually not a historian, but I have relied on historians, eminent historians also present here, like Father Jerish, who is doing his doctoral thesis on history. But for the fact that I have been in this institution and teaching for several years and being in the region for about 15 years or so, has prompted probably Father ANCHUKANDAM to call me to give this short introduction. Monsignor Matthias was the one who led this group of Salesians to Northeast India. And it is important to understand the socio-political, religious and cultural context of Northeast India at this time in order to arrive at an evaluation of the missionary work of the Salesians in Northeast India and the establishment of formation centers for philosophical and theological formation of Salesians in India. The report of the Apostolic Delegate of India on the situation of the Assam Prefecture, submitted to the Propaganda Fide in 1919, states like this, and it is in Italian. Ora però che è terminata la guerra, la prima guerra mondiale, mi pare che convenga dare una sistemazione più stabile a questa prefettura che comprende un estesimo territorio con più di 7 milioni di abitanti. I cattolici sono 4.554, molti dei quali sono nuovi cristiani convertiti nel distretto di Chota Nagpur dell'arcidiocesi di Calcutta, costretti a venire qua in cerca di migliore fortuna. A quando mi si dice vi sono ottime speranze di conversione in una missione come l'Assam, dove abbondano tribù fuori casta. And he proposes in that very same letter that the Salesians be entrusted with this mission, with these words: vorrei suggerire, Eminenza, i Salesiani del Venerabile Bosco, essi fanno tanto bene altrove, potrebbero farne anche qui in una missione vergine, così a dire come l'Assam. The region of Northeast India was known for its difficult terrain, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and religious diversity, and also political instability. The socio-political and religious situation proved to be a natural challenge to the evangelization of the region, and the Salesians turned it into an opportunity for the growth of the church through the formation of missionaries in loco, right from the beginning of the mission. Let me therefore present the land and the peoples of this region. When you talk about Northeast India, it's a sub-Himalayan region of India consisting of lofty mountains, relatively high hill tracts intermingled with plateaus and river-fed valleys. And the entire area of northeast of India covers an area of 255,168 square kilometers. And just to have an idea, Italy has about 300,000 square kilometers, a little more. And that means about 3/4 of Italy was this whole region entrusted to the Salesians at the beginning. And this is actually about 9% of the total area of India. The creation of East Pakistan, presently Bangladesh, and Burma, Myanmar, during the post-British period made Northeast India a landlocked area with about 4,000 kilometers of international boundary, sharing borders with Nepal, Bhutan, China, erstwhile Tibet, Myanmar, and Bangladesh. And the mighty Brahmaputra River bifurcates the entire land surface of northeast India into a region in the north and a region in the south. I would like to present to you a short presentation of a video that talks about the peoples of the northeast India. Un assaggio basterebbe, no? Se no. Professor David C.M. Lee, a Catholic historian and a member of the Planning Commission of India, has this to say: there are a few places in this world where such a variety of peoples live in close proximity to each other as in northeast India. Of the 635 tribal communities in India, over 200 categories of the Mongolian racial stock are found in this region of northeast India. Though the majority of the population in this area speak Sanskrit-based languages, namely Assamese and Bengali, there is a great linguistic diversity in the region. Of the 325 languages listed in the peoples of India, the largest number belongs to the Tibeto-Burmese family, and 175 communities of northeast India are shown to be using these languages. The Austro-Asiatic languages are also very widely spoken, and the best known among them is Khasi, spoken in Meghalaya, the present-day Meghalaya, Shillong, a language which belongs to the Mon Khmer Nicobar group. And these tribes probably entered the region during the Aryan invasion of northwest India. And the ethnicity and the ancestral links of the region are so varied and intermingled that it is impossible to form an univocal demographic table of the region. Another method of classifying the people of northeast India is to distinguish them between those who were and who were not Sanskritized before the coming of the British in the 1820s. Sanskritization is a very slow process among the hill tribes due to the remoteness of the region and due to the fear of the plains tribes about the hills tribes. And the Kazis and the Garus were slowly opening up to Sanskritization, but with the arrival of Christianity, they became apathetic to Hinduism. Let's also look at the political and religious situation of northeast India at the arrival of the Salesians. For many centuries, the entire northeast region of India was called Assam. In fact, the whole region was called Assam before. Now people refer to northeast as the land of seven sisters. The seven sisters and an eighth brother, which is Sikkim. So we have Assam, Meghalaya, Manipur, Nagaland, Tripura, Mizoram, Arunachal Pradesh, and the eighth brother Sikkim. And all of these are full-fledged states of the Indian Union today. The dominant political power in the region before the arrival of the British was the Ahom dynasty. A little of understanding of the history of this dynasty is important. In the 13th century, the Ahoms, belonging to the Shan race from Thailand, came to the Brahmaputra valley. In the year 1228, a person called Chukafa, a Shan chief, led the Ahom army of 9,000 men in invading Kamrupa, which was the then name of Assam. The Ahoms defeated the two Bodo tribes, namely Moran and the Borahis. And at the time, hundreds of petty kings and tribal chieftains ruled this northeastern region. And the Ahoms, through their strategic moves, annexed the entire region, and they became the supreme power in the northeast of India. In fact, Aurangzeb, who was the Mughal emperor in Delhi at that time, 1658 to 1707, appointed Mir Jamala, the Mughal Subedar of Bengal, to check the growth of the Ahoms. But the Mughals could not contain the Ahoms, and therefore the Ahom chief defeated the Mughals in 1662. And the most established Ahom ruler was King Rudra Singh in 1700, the early 18th century. After the great success of the Ahoms in Assam, the rulers descended into internal dissension and rivalry. There were several chieftains and there was rivalry among them, and therefore they called for a third party in order to mediate between them. And that third party was the British East India Company, who were waiting for an opportunity to enter the region for their economic purposes. In 1792, the company rallied its forces under Captain T. Welsh to settle the disputes among the Ahom rulers, and later the company removed themselves from the peace initiatives as no long-standing solutions were acceptable to the Ahoms. Gradually, the British East India Company ceded power and gave the rule of the country, the whole region, to the British Crown. This was done especially after the first Anglo-Burmese War, and at the end of which there was a treaty called the Treaty of Andabo, where the British became the sole deciding authority in the Northeast Indian region. They suppressed all these petty independent kingdoms, and defeated all the chieftains, annexed their territories, and the British administration entrusted everything to the administration of a person called David Scott. In 1833, the British handed over Upper Assam, the region of the Dhansiri River, to a native prince, Purandar Singh. And Purandar Singh, the new king, could not pay the annual tribute to the British, and so he was also removed from his authority. The British introduced naturally several developments for transportation, for connectivity in this region. And in 1906, the British united Assam with East Bengal into a single province. So the whole region, which today is Myanmar, Bangladesh, Northeast India, part of Tibet, they were all part of the British province of Bengal. Let's look at the religious policy of the British. In India, religion and culture were so closely intertwined as to be virtually indistinguishable. The British realized that it was counterproductive to interfere with Indian religious beliefs, practices, and the freedom of worship. And due to the Indian Rebellion of 1857, the rule of India was transferred from the British East India Company to the British Crown. And the pressing reason for the rebellion was misunderstanding about the religious sentiments of people. And as documented, the British had realized that in matters of religion, the natives of India were particularly sensitive, and any interference with the religion would eventually ensure the total destruction of British power. So the British East India Company maintained a policy of religious neutrality, and later on the Crown, the British Empire too, maintained this same religious policy of neutrality. However, they allowed certain missionaries to have their missionary work in the region, particularly for their gains of making the British Empire known and bringing about education in the region. I will not go into the details. According to the policy of the government, only one mission could work in each hill district of the northeastern region. And this was a blessing to the Protestant missions, namely the American Baptists, the Welsh Presbyterians, and the British Baptists. The British government comprised of Protestants who were against the Catholics in many ways, and they limited the area of Catholic missionary work only to the Khasi Hills. And that's the reason why the Salesians arrived in Shillong, which is the capital of the Khasi Hills. It was only in the 1930s that the government granted Catholic missionaries with a permit to work in the Garo Hills, which is the neighboring region, and then in other parts of northeast India. In fact, the early missionaries had to seek always a permission from the government in order to enter various other regions, because these regions were led by Protestant missionaries. However, when we talk about the arrival of Christianity in northeast India, we have recorded history of the Christian presence in northeast India already from the 17th century. And contrary to popular thinking, Christianity did not enter the region through the British rule. Catholics were the first to have contact with the territory even before the arrival of the British. It is true that the progress of Christian movements in northeast India gathered momentum with the Treaty of Yandabo between the English and the East India Company and the Kingdom of Burma on the 24th of February 1826, at the end of the First Anglo-Burmese War. However, due to the region's geographical proximity to China and Tibet, the northeast India served as a gateway for missionaries who were on their expeditions into China and Tibet. In fact, the first recorded history of Catholic presence in this region is based on those missionaries who were on their way to Tibet. The dreamland was Tibet, to arrive in Lhasa. And it was very difficult to reach the region, and they tried various routes, and one of the routes that they tried was through the southern part of Tibet, which is through the northeast of India. Towards the end of 19th century, the Holy See made some rearrangements in the ecclesiastical map of India. In 1834, Pope Gregory XVI separated the eastern part of India to form the Vicariate of Bengal. And the whole of eastern India, namely East, West, and Central Bengal, and Assam, belonged to this Vicariate of Bengal. Although the entire northeast was under the jurisdiction of the Vicar Apostolic of Bengal, since its establishment in 1834, the Vicariate lacked sufficient personnel for the pastoral ministry of the small flock scattered in and around Assam. In 1845, at the request of Monsignor Patrick Joseph Carew, the Vicar Apostolic of Bengal, Pope Gregory XVI divided the Vicariate of Bengal into the Vicariates of Calcutta and Chittagong. And therefore, Bangladesh began to have a particular Vicariate of its own. In 1850, Pope Pius IX established them as independent ecclesiastical units of West Bengal and East Bengal. The first missionaries to arrive in this region after 1850 were the MEP missionaries. 1846, Tibet was separated from the Vicariate and with the Vicariate Apostolic of Lhasa. And care of this new Vicariate was entrusted to the Missions Étrangères de Paris, the MEP missionaries or the foreign missionaries of Paris. And they made their efforts to go to Tibet. And the various missionaries who came, especially Nicholas Crick and others, they were wanting to go to Tibet, and they stopped somewhere in Assam, in Guwahati and other places, only because they were proceeding towards Tibet. So the mission did not last very long. After them came the Pime Fathers. In 1870, Assam and Bhutan were placed under the Prefecture Apostolic of Krishnagar, Central Bengal, by Pope Pius IX. And the mission was entrusted to the Pontificio Istituto Missioni Estere di Milano, Pime, or the Milan Foreign Mission Society. And they, especially with Father Jacopo Broi from Venice, tried to establish the mission, but that also was only because they were on their way to Tibet. After them came the Salvatorians. The Salvatorians were in Shillong for about 25 years, but for a very short time of active ministry because the First World War started. In 1890 they came, but in 1914 the war started, and therefore they had to leave the place because the British would not allow the Germans to remain on because they were enemy aliens in India. After the Salvatorians left, we have a short time when the Jesuits were given charge of the region of northeast of India. When the Prefecture Apostolic of Assam was entrusted to the Belgian Jesuits of Bengal. And in 1915, the Archbishop nominated his secretary, Father Lefebvre, as the vice administrator of Assam mission. But he complained of the fact that we have too few personnel, and so we cannot manage this mission, and therefore wrote to Propaganda Fide to find other groups of missionaries who would come to the northeast of India. And it was at this time that Propaganda Fide was having negotiations with the Salesians, with Father Paul Albera, in order to start the mission in India. And so the Salesians, who began the mission already in Tamil Nadu, South India, in the 1906, agreed to take up the whole mission of Northeast India. And I would like to conclude with the emphasis that the Salesians gave right at the beginning. When the Salesians took over, the Prefecture Apostolic of Assam comprised of 170,000 square kilometers with a total population of over 7 million. The region had 33,000 Protestants and just about 5,000 Catholics. The Brahmaputra Valley, the whole region that is this northeast of India, had a majority population of Hindus and fair number of Muslims. And the tribal people followed various indigenous tribal religions. The Salesian missionaries focused their efforts in learning the English and the Khasi languages, and during the first year, they worked alongside with the Jesuits. But the sudden passing away of Father Lefebvre in April 1922, the Salesians had reached only in January 1922, forced the Salesians to take over his responsibilities almost immediately. On 24th May 1922, on the feast of Mary, Help of Christians, Father Matthias, along with the confreres, consecrated the entire Assam mission to Mary, Help of Christians. At the end of that year, there is a growth in the number of Christians, the number of catechumens, the number of baptisms, and Catholic communities. In 1921-22, there were 5,000 odd Catholics. In 1922, end of 1922, there were 6,229. There were 212 catechumens when the Salesians first came, and in 1 year it became 1,479. There were 448 baptisms in the first year, and in the second year already 752 baptisms. The Salesians continued the work, but right from the beginning thinking of formation of Salesians, formation of missionaries in loco. For Matthias was looking for immediate finance and personnel for the mission. And he noticed that the Jesuits who were beginning or bringing their future missionaries to India immediately after their novitiate. And that gave him the idea, no, I will bring the Salesians already as aspirants to begin the novitiate in India. So they would make their novitiate in India together with the Indian candidates who would be there, so that they will get an idea of the whole region, and they will be able to learn, to understand, appreciate and love each other, while also learning how to manage each other's limitations. He further explained that young Europeans would be better positioned to adapt to the climatic, social and cultural conditions of the missions fieldwork, and even learn the local languages with greater facility. And so Monsignor Matthias wrote again to the Rector Major, seeking permission to start the novitiate by the end of the second year that they are there, 1923 in Shillong. And Father Rinaldi, the Rector Major, approved the request and promised to send a group of novices from Europe in the same year. And in the meantime, Father Eugene Medellet was of the opinion that the novitiate should be placed in South India and not in Shillong in the north and northeast, as most of the local vocations were from South India. He had proposed Bangalore as the most suited location for the novitiate. Monsignor Matthias was able to persuade Father John Mora and Father George Tomatis, two of the great collaborators of Father Medellet, to his side, and Shillong was preferred, and the novitiate was started in Shillong. approved and started in Shillong. Thus, in less than 2 years of their arrival in Assam missions, the first formation house for the Salesians in India, named Our Lady's House, was canonically erected in Shillong in 1923, which would eventually also serve as a student at philosophy and later of theology. The first batch of 8 novices came from Europe on 22nd December 1923, accompanied by Father Stephen Ferrando and a cleric Joseph Foglia, and they were joined by 4 novices from South India and 1 from Shillong itself, a former teacher of St. Edmunds. And 11 of them made the profession on the 21st of January 1925 and continued with their philosophical studies. The theology section was opened on the occasion of the extraordinary visitation of Father Peter Ricaldone in 1927. The rest of the history we can read in this book. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, dear Father Shaji, for your presentation. I think you were really very, very precise and giving us the important timeline to understand the reading of this book by Father Thomas ANCHUKANDAM. And apart from orienting us to know the socio-political context, also you have inspired us to go to Northeast as a tourist to visit the places. Yes, watching the videos. No, thank you. Next we move on with the presentation of Father Michal Wojtasz. Completed his master's degree in the fields of theology, history and pedagogy at the Universitas Comeniana in Bratislava. And in 2014 he obtained his doctoral degree in the sciences of education at Salesian Pontifical University in the field of educational planning and leadership. Currently he is professor in the chair of Salesian history and pedagogy, director of the Institute of Pedagogy, director of the Centro Studi Don Boscvo at the same university. Notably, he is a member in the editorial board of the Journal of Salesian Studies, Note di Pastorale Giovanile, and Orientamenti Pedagogici. And from 2020-21, as all of us know, he is also the vice rector of the Salesian Pontifical University. He is the author of the volumes Progettare e Discernere, Reviving Don Bosco's Oratory and Salesian Pedagogy after Don Bosco, from the first generation up to the Synod on Young People, 1888 to 2018. May I call upon Father Wojtasz to enrich us with this presentation on the Salesian congregation in the immediate post-World War II, the Vatican, and the post-Vatican periods. Floor is yours, dear Father.
Thank you very much. Of course, this topic about giving an introduction, I offer only some general ideas because the period of time is very complex. So maybe only some general ideas which had some of influence on Salesian identity. So in the 1950s, the time was characterized by hope and renewal, energy tied to post-war growth, both in civil society and in the church. In the so-called years of the burning bush, there was convergence on trajectories for the future in search for a just society, far from every form of violence, the memory of which was still very much alive. Within youth organizations, there was a growth in traditional associations, a trend that would become the driving force of the changes and tumult of the subsequent 1960s, in which the novelty of the Second Vatican Council, the return to the sources, idealism, and some socialist utopias, with radicalism typical for the younger generations, would be mixed. In the Salesian congregation, the 1950s were generally characterized by the stability of Don Ricaldone's teaching and organizational structure, which reached beyond his term of office. The growth of personnel and activities of the youth apostolate is visible, for example, in the Salesian Sodalities magazines, encouraged in their activity by the canonization of Dominic Savio in 1954, or the curricula of the FMA Salesian Active School, to realize the industrious growth of those years. The center of gravity of the congregation was still in Europe and in America, but the major index of growth manifested already in Asia. Father Renato Zigiotti, term of office as Rector Major, was characterized by his travels and the growing worldwide sense of the Salesian charism. Also, it has to be noted that the generally optimistic picture of the world was not far from triumphalist positions that looked at the future through the lens of perpetual growth, large institutes, world expansion, new causes of canonization, and so on and so on. The symbol of this mentality could be identified also with the architectural constructions like the Colle Don Boscvo or the Cinecittà Institute in Rome, with its modern temple of Don Bosco in the tune with the functionalist architecture of the neighborhood that had arisen around the famous film studios, and in other examples. Also, the projects of this university date back to the second half of the 50s. So it was all planned in a vision of perpetual growth of big numbers, and then things changed rapidly, So the turning point of General Chapter 19, celebrated during the Council, is a time that can be mentioned. The Rector Major, new elected, Father Aloysius Ricciari, recalled the atmosphere of those days. During the work of the chapter, one always felt that all those present were anxiously watching the Vatican Ecumenical Council. The atmosphere in Rome clearly encouraged this spring climate of prospect so full of promise. In addition to the magisterial content, an important influence on the chapter was also exerted by the working form of the Council. The Salesian chapter paradigm changed in terms of duration, also the dialogical mode of proceeding, the depth of issues dealt with, and by the openness to the humanities. The chapter proceedings, held in Rome in the new facilities of the Salesian Athenaeum, in Aula 2, lasted for almost 2 months. It was a record compared to the previous general chapters, which lasted in average about 10 days. This abundance of time created room for more open discussion in an atmosphere of freedom that brought out also the differences present in the assembly. The emphasis on the importance of scholarly experts in the chapter found itself in harmony with the Council's openness to the scientific discoveries, especially in Gaudium et Spes, with a special role given to pedagogy, sociology, political science, and social design. Also, the use of planning and planning methodology is motivated by the criticism of the use of partial emergency solutions, calling the congregation for the development of a conception of pastoral care as a whole. In the almost mechanical adoption of social planning in the pastoral care area, one can sense the enthusiasm of the time, the confidence in science, and the emphasis on practical changes that were waiting too long to be implemented. The Council influenced the chapter's work, including its predominantly pastoral orientation. There are some nuclei of thought that I would like to mention because they were like an anticipation of different other general chapters through the second half of the 20th century. The different areas were like the reorganization of central government structures, downsizing of works, updating or formation of Salesian personnel and adult apostolate. At the General Council level, the Counselor for Youth and Parish Ministry was established at Experimentum, which merged under his responsibility the areas of responsibility of the previous school counselor, vocational training counselor, and counselor for oratories and parishes. 6 other new counselors were entrusted with the animation of a group of provinces in a geographical region because of the need of decentralization. Then the second area of reflection concerned reshaping or downsizing of works, a concept that had good fortune in General Chapter 19 because it responded to a widespread desire in the congregation. The general principle was the simplification of houses that were too large and the reduction in the number of works that were too small. This was the idea. The implementation was not so easy and not so imminent. And with regard to the type of work, the Salesian boarding school seemed to have entered a crisis, both in the perception of the Salesians and in the perception also of the student, especially in the Western Hemisphere. The chapter therefore stressed the value of the oratory above all. Special attention should be given to the original work of the oratory, fittingly brought up to date and reshaped. A third issue felt by the chapter members related to the area of formation was summed up in the key word qualification of Salesians. Qualification meant primarily acquiring the skills necessary for the mission in today's world. In his presentation of the documents of the chapter, the Rector Major was not afraid to call a sweet illusion the claim that a bit of goodwill was enough to meet the needs of the works. Also, alongside educative and pastoral matters, still referred to as the youth apostolate, reflection on the Christian and pro-social formation of adults was added, which forms the fourth focus of GC 19. 6 new areas were introduced among traditional areas: parishes, catechesis for adults, family apostolate, formation of lay teachers, ministry to workers, and finally social communication. After this general chapter and after the finishing of the Second Vatican Council works, also the situation changed abruptly, and the period towards the end of the 1960s could not be described as a tranquil or peaceful one for the congregation. Instead, the landscape of thought and activity was filled with decentralized experimentation and also opposing traditions. Youth protests in 1968 reacted to situation of unease such as colonialism, the oppression of the poor, racial discrimination, wars for world domination, and so on. Also important issue was the influence of economical powers on educational systems. In the intellectual world, Marxist ideology, the Frankfurt School of Criticism of Mass Society Dynamics, and also the critical pedagogy resurfaced with renewed strength. The ideal world to be built was seen through the lenses of participation, decentralization, dialogue, social justice, freedom, and also new morality. The crisis in the Salesian context was felt above all through the rapid decline in the vocations, the abandonment of Salesian life that occurred throughout the 60s and 70s, both during the period of formation and also with increased demands for laicization of priests. The number of Salesians from 1968 up to 1977 decreased by about a quarter. This demographical crisis was described by Rector Major in a very dramatic picture was only the most conspicuous effect of a religious order that was in a process of strong change. Then the next chapter, the special general chapter, was dealing different issues of also the legacy of the Second Vatican Council, and also of the rethinking of the identity of the Salesian congregation. There were more than 200 days of intense work from June 1971 to January 1972 in the new headquarters of the Generalate in Rome. Those made the special general chapter the longest chapter in Salesian history. The departure point for all of the SGC's effort was to rediscover in depth our own identity in the light of today's situation. The identity of the Salesians linked to also educative and pastoral activity was expressed in the term mission, leaving out the traditional word "and" in order to underline the dimension of the vocation received from God within the Church, rather than seeing it as a simply posed as an institutional end to be reached. Salesian youth ministry is expressed in the Christ and Church-centered perspective of the Council, with a single objective: the salvation of the young. In pursuit of this goal, we are able to communicate divine life, making the family of man and its history more human. Also, the rhetorics change from Ricardonian times to the times of the Second Vatican Council. There are different shifts of Salesian vocabulary also, which is a theme too complex to address here. But it's interesting because those are the years of the beginning of the Bangalore Center. So for sure there were different influences also on different generations of Salesians. And there was this principle of the absolute priority of pastoral work for youth, with the need to apply the pastoral criterion to all apostolic activity. Also the reshaping of works, especially the classical boarding schools, and updating of the community according to the new mindset. There were also some courageous formulations during the special general chapter, like the following: to continue a purely mechanical and pastorally inefficacious form of activity which merely wears out the confreres is inadmissible. There are also some interesting points when we look up to the translations of the documents of the special general chapter, because also in the English-speaking world, the crisis of the boarding schools was not so much ahead. So there are some shifts of meaning also in the translation, especially of this phrase, of this sentence. Then I've chosen some conferences and some scientific gatherings which express well the shifting of the mindset and of the method of study. There were two conferences on updating the Salesian pedagogy, one before the council and one after. So there are some interesting insights on the aggiornamento of Salesian pedagogy. The first organized conference was in Rome by the Superior Institute of Pedagogy from Turin, during the preparatory work for the Second Vatican Council under the title Don Bosco as the Educator for Today, 1960. The second, 14 years later, at the time of the special general chapter. It's interesting to see always this polarity between the new today, or everything has changed, and an old yesterday. So always this binomial way of seeing things in the 70s. But if we go back to the 60s, conference on updating Salesian education, the reflections were very interesting, since at the time of the conference, there was already the atmosphere of the Second Vatican II, because it was already announced But in fact, the acts begin by making explicit the full harmony with the current anxiety of renewal. But since the contributions were not as yet able to be influenced by council documents, they tended to draw on ideas that were circulating in the Salesian environment, and especially in the Superior Institute of Pedagogy. Some courageous, others very different from the typical cliches that come associated with Vatican II and the second half in the 60s. There was still a strong implicit and explicit reference to the boarding school mindset, its Salesian educators, and fostering a distinctly Christian school culture. There was an imminent rethinking of educational institutions, and it was seen under the banner of Salesian pedagogy that captures the living spirit of Don Bosco, in opposition to an oppressive Recaldonian regulations and the conforming atmosphere of the boarding school. The proposal focused on the practical preparations of educators, especially during practical training on the active life, preceded and prepared through innovative insights into a sociological understanding of society and knowledge of the psychology of the young. There is an interesting contribution of Pietro Braido, and he's seeing everything that a renewed youth ministry in which there would be the return to a more supernatural and essential Christianity, one broadly felt, backed by theory, reacting not only to the various forms of naturalism and enlightenment inherited from the 18th and 19th century, but also in opposition to manifestations of formal pietism and excessive devotionalism, characteristic of a certain 19th century Italian spirituality. Youth ministry needs a vigorous return to a purely supernatural pedagogy. So it's interesting to see those perceptions before the council, because after the council, the worldview and the perspectives were pretty much different. So in the second conference of educators, which was held in 1974 at the Generalate in Via della Pisana, was organized with the intention of exchanging not only studies by experts, but reflections, experiences, best practices of 300 participants from all over the world. The updating of Don Bosco's educational system at this conference suffered from some typical post-Vatican II paralysis, uncertainty of potential adaptations, generic considerations of method, and the lack of concrete indications. Also, the lack of grounding vision and the influences of Marxist or pragmatic epistemologies are noticeable. In these times, it seems that Peter Braido already abandoned the quest of updating preventive system, offers in the conference only a concise summary of the methodology of Don Bosco's preventive system, referring to his earlier writings, and it's also interesting that in the closing address, the Rector Major Luigi Riccieri is speaking like this. He's making some corrections to the mentality of those times. He's speaking about these trends. Underlying Don Bosco's educational work is not an ideology or any kind of methodological technique, but a vision of faith. If we put ourselves in profound harmony with his spirit, which, it is worth repeating, is essentially one of faith and supernatural charity, and therefore profoundly human, the preventive system will become the necessary logical expression of our life, and we will not allow ourselves to be influenced by mirages that do not bear the imprint of God. So sometimes there is in all these studies from the end of the 60s and in the 70s always this two-way logic of the openness to the world and the new mentality, and in a way of not losing our identity, which is pretty much linked to the past and to the supernatural perception or the division between natural and supernatural principles. I would like to finish with some short mentioning of a new project in the field of studies and which formed a new mindset, which were the Salesian colloquiums. In the post-Vatican II era, we can find an interesting ongoing experience of conferences based on discussion around Salesian themes, called colloquiums on Salesian life. The first colloquium on Salesian life took place in Lyon during the month of September in the eventful year 1968. In the difficult atmosphere of protest, criticism, and generational clashes, the colloquiums set themselves two basic objectives. The first, determined by the need to conduct serious studies on Don Bosco, his work and charism. The second, expressed by the desire to give answers to the questions of the young confreres who, because of their modern mentality, demanded indication based on historical documentation. The first president of the colloquia defines the nature of the meetings as follows. It's a ground roots initiative, not something official. Our international colloquiums are simply this: a meeting of confreres who love Don Bosco and the congregation, have a good scientific preparation, and have studies and still study Don Bosco and Salesian life in such a way that they can speak and write about it competently. In addition to the criterion of scientific seriousness, some other methodological attentions completed the gradual development of the colloquia. A high level of spreading of the proceedings, which included also the reactions and discussions provoked by the papers. At the level of objectives, the aim was to study Salesian themes, leaving in the background the need to influence practical issues. Seen from a distance, two methodological modes of study can be traced in the organization of the contents of the colloquiums. One more widespread in the first series started from Salesian history, tackling current problems in order to arrive at the goals of a future commitment. The other one started from the questions of the present context that challenged Salesian tradition in order to find answers and pointers for future direction. From the second colloquia onward, the group expanded with thinkers from the areas of sociology, anthropology, epistemology, psychology, and pastoral care. The 5 colloquia from 73 to 78 already included also the Daughters of Mary, Help of Christians, Salesian cooperators, and volunteers of Don Bosco. The colloquiums were well received in the Salesian world and influenced the maturing of thinking on several current issues. In addition to contributions on the various topics, the colloquiums brought innovation in the form and also in the method of dialogue on Salesian issues, balancing some of the dynamics of the academical world. So in brief, I trace only some lines of development in this complex period of time. I don't know which ones could be traceable, maybe also in the history of the Bangalore Institute, Christu Jyoti. But I think it's also in a continuity with the context presented before by Father Shaji. Thank you for your attention.
So as I was listening to, as we are listening to Father Vaitash, the thing that one of the greatest Second Vatican Council historians, Giuseppe Alberigo, describes this great council as historical event. And exactly Father Vaitash has dealt the period just before and a few years after this historical event, I'm very sure the experts who are here, like Father Francesco Moto, Giraudo, Casella, Zimniak, and many other historians, would agree with me if I say Father Vaitash has done a marvelous work in summarizing a complex period which is full of crucial transitions. So thank you very much, dear Father Vaitash, for your expertise. Let's move on to the next presentation, as we see Father Ivo on the screen. Father Ivo Coelho, SDB, the General Counselor for the Formation of the Congregation, Salesians of Don Boscvo, has undergone his training in Jnanadeepa Vidyapi, Pune, the University of Pune, Christu Jyoti College, Bengaluru, and Pontifical Gregorian University, Rome. He has held several offices at Divyadan Salesian Institute of Philosophy and as the provincial built up the Salesian province of Mumbai. He is an illustrious member in the Association of Christian Philosophers of India and an ardent disciple of Bernard Lonergan and also Richard Desmith. I would like to mention just two of his many books and numerous scientific articles. One, Hermeneutics and Method, the Universal Viewpoint in Bernard Lonergan, and Guidelines in Indian Philosophy of Richard Desmith, which he has edited. Who else can be, dear friends, be more apt than Father Ivo himself to enlighten us on the Salesian formation in mission after having listened to Father Shaji and Father Vaitash. Thank you, dear Father Ivo, for your availability this evening, and over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, dear Father Henry, and good evening to you, all of you, dear panelists, Father Anshu, and all those who I cannot see in the audience. I thought I would speak in Italian, but I believe the audience is mainly English speaking, and so I will speak in English. Let me begin by congratulating Father Thomas for his latest book. He brings to this book his long personal involvement with the formation community and study center of Christu Jyoti College. Student and teacher, then formator, then rector, and finally provincial. And it is certainly a work of historical competence, and I think it is also a work of love that comes through all over the book. My own association with Christu Jyoti College is restricted to the 4 years I spent there as a student in 1984 to 1988. But I was also personally involved in the Social Service Guild, in the social involvement of the college. And so I will direct my attention solely to this aspect of Christu Jyoti College, its social involvement. I think the involvement of Christu Jyoti College in the life of the surrounding villages from its very inception is something that makes it outstanding and perhaps also unique, certainly in India. Father Thomas himself says that, and I fully agree with him. Theology in Christu Jyoti College did not remain in the books and in the classrooms. It flowed into life, and life flowed back into theology. A student writing to the Archbishop of Bangalore in 1972 puts it very well. Father Thomas gives this quotation: "While we are doing our theological studies, we could not remain indifferent to the crying needs of so many poor people around our college. So we launched a program of social work. With the contributions we got from far and near, we have been able to do something." I learned from the book that the social involvement of Christu Jyoti College is as old as the college itself. It began with the college in 1968. The heart of the social involvement is the association called the Social Service Guild. This is, I think, its outstanding symbol. This is not the only kind of social involvement in the college, but certainly it is its symbol. When it was first built, Christu Jyoti College, as you can see from the cover of Thomas's book, was a huge set of buildings in the middle of many small villages. Today, of course, it is now hidden in a jungle of other buildings. But at that time, really, it was something dramatic and outstanding. The students soon became involved in the surrounding villages, organizing people, offering educational services, social services, and so on. Thomas also indicates that they were involved not only in material upliftment, but also in fighting moral evils. And that brought to mind immediately what one of my confreres in Bombay used to tell me. When he was a brother in Christjoti, he said, that was Father William Falcão, he said, there was not an hour of the day or of the night when the students were not found in the village. He was probably involved in the closest village, which is Batrahalli. And he was telling me about one particular incident where the students joined the women of the village in surrounding a house where there was a liquor den, and they forced it to close. When I came to the college in 1984, my impression was that the heyday of the SSG was over. We continued the good work that had been begun, but our interventions were mainly of a developmental and what you might say assistential nature. Some of us were intensely interested in liberation theology. We read and reflected a lot on the issue of social justice, and we were deeply convinced that it was impossible to be a true follower of Jesus without a concrete and practical concern for the poor. I think this kind of conviction was something we certainly picked up from our novice master, the late Father Anthony Mampra. And certainly that was what came to us, one of the things that came to us from the Second Vatican Council and the Special General Chapter. Still, while we were doing all this reflection, despite our sensitivity, I think the exciting years of the social involvement had gone by. I am referring to the high point of the social involvement of the SSG, which was the liberation of bonded laborers of Chikbasnapura village in 1975, an event that was popularly known as Freedom at Midnight. The leader of the SSG was obviously one of the students, but the president was the rector of the college himself, Father M.J. Matthew, still happily with us. Chikbasnapura and a few other villages in which the SSG worked contained stone quarries. The laborers there were bonded, which meant that they were practically slaves of the quarry owners, some of whom, unfortunately, I think, were also Catholic. Some 40 families of bonded laborers, several of them also Catholic, were set free. Thomas's book does not give the details, but I believe the details are found in some unpublished manuscripts that the archives of the SSG hold. The guild helped the families organize themselves into a cooperative society, and then they helped them to build houses and settle down in what was eventually called Swatantra Nagar, Freedom Village. And going from what I've heard during my student years, I believe that the process of liberating the bonded laborers also involved the arrest of some students. I believe they passed some days in jail. And at one point, dramatically, even the rector, Father M.J. Matthew himself, was arrested and spent time in jail, being the president of the SSG. To his great credit, Father M.J., as he is affectionately known, has never regretted that incident. Father Thomas tells us that KJC was greatly influenced by the Second Vatican Council and the General Chapter, the Special General Chapter of the Salesians. And he also makes the case that Christjoti had a homegrown brand of liberation theology. In fact, and this you can check out, developments in Christjoti, social involvement in Christjoti was taking place at about the same time that liberation theology was coming to world attention. The Medellin Conference, for example, took place in 1968. 1968 was also the year in which Gustavo Gutierrez coined the term liberation theology. He published his famous book, Teología de la Liberación, in 1971. Juan Luis II published Liberación de la Teología in 1975, and so on. Father Thomas admits that in Christjoti there was nothing like this level of theological reflection. John Tharakan, one of the students at that time and a Salesian of Hyderabad province, gives us the information that there used to be a study group called the Liberation Group. And Father Thomas tells us there was a much applauded paper presented by the students in a seminar organized by the Inter-Seminary Association of Bangalore. This was the kind of extent of the theological reflection in the college. But there was also the special general chapter about which Mikhal has spoken so well. And Tharakan himself says, the 20th special general chapter came as a tremendous source of inspiration and enthusiasm for the young confreres to seek a paradigm shift in the apostolate of the Congregation for the Marginalized. The chapter had helped the congregation to engage in a profound rethinking of the Salesian commitment in the contemporary world and of our collaboration in the promotion of justice in the world. After the instruction many years later on certain aspects of liberation theology, the very term seems to have fallen out of favor in many church circles. I know theological colleges and institutions where not even by mistake this word is mentioned. I do not think it was the intention of the document to ban all discussion on liberation. I am personally convinced that the driving force of the option for the poor is the gospel, and that in this option we find ourselves much closer to those on the left who uphold the rights and dignity of people rather than those on the right who uphold the dignity of power, wealth, and privilege. As Father Richery said in the years after the special chapter, collaborating in the promotion of justice in the world is an integral aspect of our religious commitment. And our own constitutions are full of this position. I quote only Article 33. In a way appropriate to religious, we share in the witness and commitment of the Church to justice and peace. While not getting involved in ideologies or party politics, we reject everything that encourages deprivation, injustice, and violence. We cooperate with all who are trying to build a society more worthy of human dignity. This, dear friends, if I'm not mistaken, was the general tenor of both the praxis and the reflection of the students in Christi Jyoti College. It is clearly something that has been strongly affirmed in the teachings of recent popes. Pope Francis, for example, says, "No one today can demand that religion be confined to the sacristy or to one's personal life alone." And he quotes Benedict XVI when he says, "The Church cannot and must not remain on the sidelines in the fight for justice. Commitment to the poor is above all an act of love, an attentiveness which considers the other in a certain sense as one with ourselves." And this is from Evangelii Gaudium, where the Pope is making reference, in fact, to Thomas Aquinas of all people. In this connection, I was thinking it would be a very good exercise eventually to examine the published and unpublished outputs of the professors of Christi Jyoti College to study the extent to which social commitment penetrated the entire academic community. The social involvement of Christi Jyoti College had various effects on the way the Salesian mission is being carried out in the South Asia region. In Christi Jyoti itself, the experience took on what Thomas calls an urban avatar, when some students pioneered another service, this time in the city of Bangalore, reaching out to street kids, marginalized kids, and migrant youth. And one of the pioneers of this urban avatar of social involvement is sitting on the panel, Father Jose Kutiani Mattathil. This was perhaps the beginning of the now widespread Salesian work for street kids and youth at risk in almost all the provinces of South Asia. Thomas also points out that the Christi Jyoti experience or the social involvement in rural areas was replicated by the students in different parts of the country. I would imagine that this was done mostly in the southern provinces of India. In the Hyderabad province, for example, we cannot help remembering the work of Father Thomas Pallithanam, at present our representative at the United Nations. And Father Thomas was deeply involved in work for the poor through organizations such as People's Action for Rural Awakening, Dalit Bahujan Shramik Union, and so on. I come more or less to the end of my reflections. Formation in mission. My question is this: could the social involvement of Christ Jyoti College be considered an example of the formation in mission to which Pope Francis and the 28th General Chapter have invited us? I would say that it certainly contains some elements, such as intense involvement with the lives of the poor, and a dynamic interaction between such involvement, theological reflection, and prayer. Theology in Christ Jyoti was far from being an armchair exercise, especially for those directly involved in the work of the SSG. The formators also were involved in this work. We have seen how the rector was not only the president of the SSG, but was also ready to stand by the consequences of social involvement for justice. I'm not so sure, however, if the formators were involved formally in helping the students reflect on their experience and learn by experience the meaning of the Salesian vocation. This phrase is from Article 98 of our constitutions, and it describes the core of the formation experience, which in Article 199 is cast in terms of discernment, immersed in the world of, immersed in pastoral work, in daily contact with people and with the young. The Salesian learns to listen to the voice of the Spirit in all that is happening to him and around him. And that is learning by experience, according to Article 119. Going by my own experience, I suggest that the Salesian component of the reflection could have been strengthened. It might have been useful, for example, for us to have followed the ongoing thinking in the congregation after the Special General Chapter, especially at least as represented in the letters of the rector majors. On the other hand, it is clear that the Special General Chapter was one of the major factors that permitted formators and students to contemplate and encourage social involvement with all the possible risks to life and property. By way of conclusion, I want to once again offer a warm word of appreciation for Father Thomas ANCHUKANDAM's meticulous research and the passion that he has poured into the book. He has said to me often, and I believe this, a large body, a sufficient body of work on particular topics is indispensable for the eventual writing of history, of the history of the provinces, or of the regions, or of the congregation as a whole. And so we look forward to much more or many more quality works in this area of the history of the Salesian charism in South Asia and in other parts of the world. Allow me to suggest also that there is space for a deeper study of the social involvement of Christ Jyoti College and especially of the SSG. This unique experience deserves to be made more fully and much better known. I end by saying how proud I feel to have been a past pupil of Christ Jyoti College. My gratitude to the entire educative and pastoral community there, formators and teachers, students and colleagues, the lay people with whom we worked, the families, the young people, and so on. My hope and my wish is that the good example of incarnated theological reflection in Christ Jyoti might continue to be an inspiration for future generations and for all our formation settings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Father Ivo, for your presence, first of all, and for presenting us your reflections. Listening to you, it was like watching a movie. Now, the character was introduced by Father Shaji, and it was little more dealt in detail by Father Vaitash, and you come forward to put forth the actions and all the things that had been carried out by the hero KJC, no? And we are very, very happy for this perspective and for your encouraging words and further many other suggestions to further research on this institute and bring forth the reflections for the better formation, theological formation in India. And having said that and thanked for the IVO, let's move on the last part of the movie, okay? The conclusion, the message that would be given by Father Jose Kutyan Matathil, SDB, a postgraduate in philosophy from the Gnanadeepa Vidyapeeth, Pune, who holds a licentiate and a doctorate in systematic theology from the Pontifical Gregorian University, Rome. He has taught philosophy and theology in various institutes in India and abroad. He has served as the provincial of the Sacred Heart Province, Bengaluru, and has been the rector of Christu Jyoti College, Bengaluru, for 9 years. His main fields of research are philosophy and systematic theology, more specifically, the philosophy and theology of religions, philosophical and theological anthropology, and Christology. He is known also for his contributions in the fields of Salesian spirituality and psycho-spiritual well-being. He has authored or edited more than 25 books and has published over 140 articles in various journals and magazines. His most recent works, Salesian Vocation, A Call to Gifted Life and Ministry, and the other, Formation Towards Psychosexual and Celibate Integration, Manual for Formies. These 2 volumes are well known in various circles. Currently, he is part of the Department of Formation of the Congregation of the Salesians of Don Boscvo, Rome. We are very happy that you are here, Father Jose, to enlighten us on the topic, preferential love for and commitment to the poor at the very heart of the Salesian formation. The floor is yours.
Very Reverend Dr. Thomas ANCHUKANDAM, respected members of the Salesian Historical Institute, and my dear friends, Father Ivo in his presentation pointed out to us that one of the greatest contributions of Christu Jyoti College has been its involvement with the poor and the effect of that in different provinces, and if I may say so, also at the congregation at large. What I would like to reflect on is what is the rationale for the preferential love and commitment to the poor that is at the heart, or that should be at the heart of Salesian formation. Father Ivo shared, let me say, the praxis. I would like to reflect a little bit on the spirituality or the theology behind that. Rabindranath Tagore, the illustrious Indian philosopher, educationist, social reformer, composer, playwright, and poet, won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1913 for a very small book called Gitanjali, or Song Offerings. One of the poems in this Gitanjali is titled, Leave This Chanting. And the poem goes like this. Leave this chanting and singing and telling of beads. Whom dost thou worship in this lonely dark corner of a temple with the doors all shut? Open thine eyes and see thy God is not before thee. He is there where the tiller is tilling the hard ground and where the pathbreaker is breaking stones. He is with them in sun and in shower, and his garment is covered with dust. Put off thy holy mantle, and even like him, come down on the dusty soil. Deliverance. Where is this deliverance to be found? Our Master himself has joyfully taken upon him the bonds of creation. He is bound with us all forever. Come out of thy meditations and leave aside thy flowers and incense. What harm is there if thy clothes become tattered and stained? Meet him and stand by him in toil and in sweat of thy brow. That's the poem, Leave This Chanting. In his message to the members of the 28th General Chapter, Pope Francis said, "It is important to say that we are not formed for the mission, but that we are formed in the mission. The mission inter gentes is our best school. Beginning with this, we pray, reflect, study, and rest." What is this mission, through and in carrying out which we are invited to form ourselves? According to the second article of our constitutions, our mission is to be in the church, signs and bearers of the love of God for young people, especially those who are poor. Our mission is to the poor, especially young people who are poor in different ways. This was stressed by Don Bosco and has been stressed again and again in recent times, starting, as we heard, with the special general chapter. And in the Rector Major's guidelines for the Salesian congregation after General Chapter 28, Father Angel Fernandez says, "It would be the death knell of our congregation if we were to distance ourselves from the poorest. That our option has to be for the poor, and we have to be formed in working with the poor, have been insisted upon so much that I do not want to labor that point again. Instead, what I would like to examine here is why our option has to be for the poor and why we have to be formed with the poor. And these, I believe, are the reasons, at least some of the reasons. First, God the poor and God of the poor. When we study the Bible, we notice that God is one who has identified himself with the poor and liberates the poor. In the Old Testament, God chooses the Jews, an outcast, nomadic people despised by their neighbors. From among them, God chooses an ordinary, simple man, Abraham, to be the father of God's chosen people. And when his people were oppressed, he liberated them. In the New Testament, Jesus Christ is identified with the poor in his birth, life, passion, and death. The Magnificat, the Beatitudes, his inaugural address at the synagogue at Nazareth, and numerous other texts show that Jesus identifies himself with the poor and refuses to accept the authority of their oppressors. St. Paul, in the letter to the Philippians, says that he emptied himself and took the form of a servant and humbled himself, becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And death on the cross, as we know, was reserved for the most despised and worst of criminals. He embraced that. Jesus Christ is precisely God become poor, as the father of liberation theology, Gutierrez would say, and he is the poor. God chooses a solidarity with the poor as a necessary way of saying humanity. God cannot remain neutral. God cannot remain neutral in a situation of oppression. This is because if God remains neutral in such a situation, God would be indirectly approving the status quo, that is, the unjust social order. Thus, if he remains neutral, he would in effect be lending support to the oppressors. And if he supports the oppressors, God will not be a just God. To be just, God has to denounce injustice. And when God denounces injustice, he automatically becomes on the side of the victims of injustice, that is, on the side of the poor. God's universal love. God loves everyone because his love is universal. However, in different contexts, it takes different manifestations. In the context of oppression, for the oppressed, God's love will take the form of liberation. But for their oppressors, it will take the form of a call to conversion and disempowerment. God's love for the oppressor takes the form of challenge and confrontation, much as the love of a parent for an unruly child would. If God did not side with the poor in their struggle, God's love would not be universal. since its neutrality would serve the interests of the oppressors. Thus, his love would be only for the oppressors. However, by siding with the poor, he shows his love for the oppressor by challenging them to conversion, and he shows his love for the poor by liberating them. Therefore, God's love becomes universal precisely because it gives preference to the poor and the marginalized. The magisterium of the poor. In Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis affirms, for the Church, the option for the poor is primarily a theological category rather than a cultural, sociological, political, or philosophical one. This is why I want a church which is poor and for the poor. They have much to teach us. Not only do they share in the sensus fidei, but in their difficulties they know the suffering Christ. We need to let ourselves be evangelized by them. We are called to find Christ in them, to lend our voice to their causes, but also to be their friends, to listen to them, to speak for them, and to embrace the mysterious wisdom which God wishes to share with us through them. Evangelii Gaudium 198. According to the Pope, the poor have much to teach us, and there is a mysterious wisdom which God wishes to share with us through them. There are indications in the Gospels that Jesus learned from the poor and the suffering, that he discerned what it was that the Father wanted of him through listening to the poor. Thus he seems to have discerned that it was time to begin the mission to the Gentiles when the Canaanite woman challenged him, saying, "Yet even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." Although at the wedding feast at Cana, he responded to our Blessed Mother saying, "My hour has not yet come." He seems to have discerned that he needed to act in that situation when he heard our Blessed Mother telling the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." The Second Vatican Council in Dei Verbum 8, Lumen Gentium 12, Gaudium S 4, etc. indicates that the truths of faith are entrusted to the people of God, and we need to listen and we need to learn from all. If so, would we not have to admit that there are different levels of magisterium in the church? First, the hierarchical, authoritative, and guiding magisterium of the Pope and bishops by virtue of the ministry entrusted to them by Jesus. Second, the exploratory and explanatory magisterium of the theologians based on their scholarly competence. Third, the foundational magisterium of all Christians on account of the sensus fidei. That is the foundation for all the other magisterium that we have in the church, the baptism that we have received. Fourth, the enriching magisterium of the poor because of God's preferential option for them that made him become poor so as to enrich us with his poverty. Jesus thanked the Father saying, "I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and the intelligent, and you have revealed them to infants." I believe infants here stands for the poor and the oppressed and the marginalized. If God has revealed many things to the infants, do they not have the right and the duty to teach all? What do the poor have to teach us, we might ask? Many things. Let us just indicate one thing. The poor bear in their broken bodies the consequences of our injustice. Their broken bodies reveal to us that the way our society exists and functions creates injustice. If we uphold this society and live in the comfort and privilege it provides, then we are legitimizing that comfort and privilege. And our prayer, which does not pay attention to this situation, would be tacitly approving this situation of oppression. The one to whom such a prayer is addressed cannot be the God of the Bible, the God of life who identifies with the hungry, the naked, and the least ones. The one to whom such a prayer is addressed would be an idol, a God of our creation, a God of wealth, security, power, and status. Thus the poor reveal to us that while we may think that we worship the God of the Scriptures, our true God, the God to whom we devote our energies, and the God to whom our lives, the God by whom our lives are governed, is the God of wealth, security, privilege, status, power, comfort, and idol. According to Ronald Rolheiser, one of the contemporary spiritual masters, in the poor, God is ever present in our world, waiting to be met. In the powerless, one can find the power of God. In the voiceless, one can hear the voice of God. In the economically poor, one can find God's treasures. In the weak, one can find God's strength. And in the unattractive, one can find God's beauty. Extra pauperes nulla salus. Outside the poor, there is no salvation. The role of the poor in the work of salvation is affirmed by Pope Francis in these words. Salvation came to us from the yes uttered by a lowly maiden from a small town on the fringes of a great empire. The Savior was born in a manger in the midst of animals like children of poor families. He was presented at the temple along with the 2 turtle doves, the offering made by those who could not afford a lamb. He was raised in a home of ordinary workers and worked with his own hands to earn his bread. He assured those burdened by sorrow and crushed by poverty that God has a special place for them in his heart. Blessed are you poor, yours is the kingdom of God. He made himself one of them. I was hungry and you gave me food to eat, and taught them that mercy towards all of these is the key to heaven. Evangelii Gaudium 197. And Jesus accomplished the work of salvation by dying crucified, a form of death reserved for the most unfortunate and despised in society. Don Bosco promised us work, bread, and heaven. Heaven came to us through the poor, and there is no other way to heaven except through the poor. And this is very emphatically affirmed by Jesus. At the end of our life, when we stand before the judgment seat of God, God will judge us only on one criteria, namely, how we dealt with the poor. For I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. These words of Jesus are paraphrased for us today by James A. Forbes, an interdenominational pastor in New York City, in these words: nobody gets to heaven without a letter of reference from the poor. So if we want to go to heaven, we need a recommendation letter from the poor. The words of Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew indicate that to touch the poor is to touch Christ. All through Christian tradition, there are incidents, even if historians might say many of them perhaps are of a legendary nature, where it has been revealed to those who have touched the poor that they have touched Christ. And one famous example is that of the young Francis of Assisi kissing a leper and then not finding the leper when he looked back, indicating that he had encountered God. To touch Christ, to touch the poor is to touch Christ. And to touch Christ is to be saved, as the woman with that flow of blood realized. And Jesus says, power went out of me without my knowledge. And that's the only way to salvation. Perhaps it is this truth that underlies the statement of John Sobrino, Extra pauperes nulla salus. Engagement with the poor, the enfleshment and incarnation of Christian spirituality. Christian spirituality is our way of following Jesus. Following Jesus would mean that we engage in activities that he himself has engaged in, bringing good news to the poor, proclaiming release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, letting the oppressed to go free, and inviting the rich to sell everything. We, so to say, give flesh to Christian spirituality, make it become embodied, visible, by acting Christ-like amidst the poor. Letting ourselves be evangelized by the seeds of the Word. The Second Vatican Council teaches us that the seeds of the Word are present in various national and religious traditions. That God is God the poor, or God of the poor, which is a core revelation of the Old Testament and New Testament, is very strongly present, for example, in the Hindu tradition. Several religious texts in India speak of God as Dina Bandhu, friend of the poor. Thus, the Narada Bhakti Sutra of the 10th century says that the Lord hates the proud and loves the lowly. In a letter written in 1897, we spoke of Gutierrez and Ron in 1968. This is a letter in 1897. Swami Vivekananda spoke of God as God the miserable, Daridra Narayana, literally God the poor. And he said like this, the only God I believe in, my God the wicked, my God the miserable, my God the poor of all races, of all species, is the special object of my worship. Vivekananda called for Daridra Narayana Seva, that is serving God in the poor. This idea was later popularized by Mahatma Gandhi. And Gandhi said, I recognize no God except that God that is to be found in the heart of the dumb millions. Closely associated with the idea of Daridra Narayana is a social philosophy of Sarvodaya, development of all, and Antyodaya, development of the least. Social movements that caught the imagination of the people of India under the inspiration of Mahatma Gandhi and Vinoba Bhave in the 1940s, 50s and 60s. The understanding that God is the God of the poor and that we need to work for the upliftment and welfare of all is not something unique to the Christian tradition. God has made himself known to all peoples, Romans 1:20. We are to remain open to be evangelized by the seeds of the word present in other traditions. And so, why we have to have an option for the poor, a preferential option for the poor in our formation. We have to be formed with the poor because the God we serve is a God of the poor, is God the poor. Because the enriching magisterium of the poor gives us insights into God. Because the poor are the gateway to heaven. Because in touching the poor, we touch Christ. And because in being with the poor, we enflesh our spirituality. And the methodology for doing this. The methodology of our formation is a liberative, dialogical, discernment and spiral methodology. It has basically 4 steps. First, immersion in the situation of the poor and the oppressed. Second, letting oneself be evangelized, instructed, taught by the poor and the oppressed. Third, interpreting and understanding the situation on the basis of what scripture, church teachings, other religious traditions, social sciences and the poor tell us about the causes of and remedies for the situation encountered. And fourth, taking effective steps together with the poor of all religions. That is walking together. That is synodality. Synodality on this earth, there are not only Christians. Synodality, walking together for the welfare of all the people whom God has created. We have to walk together with the people of other religions also, is to free people from oppressive situations to live in accordance with the kingdom preached by Jesus. These 4 steps are interdependent and influence each other in all directions. It is spiral because the new reality brought into being by step 4 which we described becomes a new point of immersion, step 1, and the process continues. A proud heritage of Christi Jyoti College, whose history Dr. Thomas ANCHUKANDAM has so painstakingly, professionally and brilliantly recorded in the book which is presented today, is its commitment to the poor. That commitment, I believe, was inspired by the social movements prevalent in the country as well as the challenges extended by the liberative potential of the Gospels. And I wish Dr. Thomas ANCHUKANDAM many more years of fruitful research. I pray that commitment to the poor be a significant part of the Salesian formation for many reasons which we have adduced above. And I conclude with the talisman of Mahatma Gandhi. I will give you a talisman. Whenever you are in doubt, or when the self becomes too much with you, apply the following test: discernment. Recall the face of the poorest and the weakest man whom you have seen and ask yourself, if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him, will he gain anything by it? Will it restore to him control over his own life and destiny? In other words, will it lead to Swaraj, freedom for the hungry and spiritually starving millions? Then you will find your doubts and yourself melt away. I began with a quotation from Rabindranath Tagore, a Hindu. I ended with a quotation from Mahatma Gandhi, another Hindu. Why a quotation from, why begin with a Hindu and end with a Hindu in a Christian theological discourse? That's a question I leave you with. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, dear Father Jose, for your presence, for painstaking efforts to bring forth the message that the hero, Christo Jodi College, wants to give us through this, as you said, theological discourse, which is preferential love for and commitment to the poor at the very heart of the Salesian formation. It's very clear and to the point, and let's all work together for it. And we are in time, and we are moving to the last item of the day. The author of the book in presentation today, Father Thomas ANCHUKANDAM, has a doctorate in ecclesiastical history from the Pontifical Gregorian University, Rome. He has been the director of Institute of Salesian History, Rome, from 2015, before which he has been teaching church history in at least 11 ecclesiastical institutes in India and abroad, including Salesian Pontifical University. He has served as the rector of Christo Jodi College for 6 years and has been the provincial of Sacred Heart Province, Bengaluru, for 6 years. He has authored or edited 9 books, which include, well known in the historical circle, Catholic Revival in India in the 19th century, the role of Monsignor Clement Bona. He has numerous scientific articles to his credit. Inspired by the message given by Father Jose, I'd like to also give my opinion on this book of Father Thomas. Father Thomas sets a new trend in the scientific narration of the birth and growth of Christo Jodi College during the year 1967 and 1976, which can be in my opinion, can be a motivation in very many aspects to all the formation institutions of the Salesian congregation. The study on Christo Jodi College can inspire, as Father Ivo was saying, similar researches on the institutions, in particular the 2 other Salesian theological centers that are in functioning currently in India. The Sacred Heart Theological College, Shillong, aggregated to the Salesian Pontifical University from 1989 onwards, and Don Bosco Theological Center, Kavarapetai, Chennai, that is affiliated to the same university. The contribution of Father Thomas, in fact, offers many historical perspectives to be observed critically in carrying forward the theological formation of the Salesians in India, especially by the 3 Salesian theologates in India. Why? To respond to the need of strengthening the local theologies, as Father Jose was speaking, and theologians, local theologians, who can contribute to the believing community worldwide. Thanks for listening to my opinion on this book. And now it is my honor to invite Father Thomas ANCHUKANDAM to address us with his concluding words for our today's gathering.
Dear friends, after having taught and having been associated with several of the ecclesiastical institutions, 11 to be precise, as given on the back cover of the book itself, I came to the realization that Studi College, Bangalore, which was born and took its first tentative steps on the path of the theological formation of Salesians in India in the post-Vatican II years, and in the context of the 19th and the 20th general chapters of the Salesian congregation, had a uniqueness all its own. It was quite unique after having had this experience in different parts of the world and different parts of the country. While the Second Vatican Council launched the Catholic Church on the path of intercultural and interreligious dialogue, the Salesian congregation, for its part, strove to deal with the challenge of incarnating its charism in regions which had a multicultural and pluri-religious context. And India, perhaps, is the best example of the same. This was particularly significant in the South Asia region, which is noted for its linguistic, cultural, and religious diversity. And it goes without saying that this challenge had to be addressed primarily in the formation houses. Formation houses meant to prepare candidates for the future active apostolic engagements in the different parts of India in particular, and in the South Asia region in general. And as was envisaged at the time, Studi College was to be an inter-provincial venture of the then 3 provinces of Calcutta, Madras, and Guwahati. Today, Kolkata, Guwahati, and Chennai. Although, understandably, the host province, which was Chennai or Madras, had to make the greater contributions to realize this venture and to make it function by providing personnel for teaching and also the financial aspects. The choice of Bangalore for this interprovincial institution was itself motivated by several factors. First of all, its pleasant climate, the generally peaceful coexistence of the various religious communities, the presence of Catholic and Protestant institutions of higher education, ecclesiastical formation, including several diocesan and religious-run seminaries and hospitals, Muslim madrasas and Hindu ashrams, all of which it was felt would serve the interests of a congregation intent on forming priests to serve in the pluri-religious context of India. In fact, in later years, all these groups felt free to drop in to visit or to hold programs in the premises of the college itself. In fact, it was not very rare to see people coming in with sandalwood paste on their foreheads, and also with the string of the Brahmins, etc., coming to the college to hold meetings, to address conferences and congresses, etc. Further, the presence of a number of Catholic formation houses in the city itself and the easy air, road and rail links connecting Bangalore to the rest of the country and to the rest of the world made it also possible for qualified theologians and others to be invited to come over, be it to give a hand with the various theological courses or to give talks on relevant topics of a socio-economical, politico-religious nature. The number of national and international meetings, conventions and congresses in the campus held down the years bears out this my statement. Besides, the number of parishes, schools, juvenile homes and even the prisons in the city, made it possible for the Salesians to be provided with the possibilities for regular youth as well as socio-cultural and philanthropic activities in a variety of settings, which would serve them well in their future missionary and priestly apostolate. I think it's quite unique in the Salesian formation anywhere in the world. And I've shown it also in the various pages of this book. And all this in line with the mind of the post-Vatican Church, which had opened its doors and windows, and above all, its heart to the world, especially to the world of the poor and to the, up to then, theologically untouchables. Let us say the Hindus, the pagans, or the Gentiles, as was the then current terms. It was these minor and not so minor considerations and convictions which made me to set out on this project of presenting to a wider scholarly world the type of experiential theological formation which Christi Jyoti College had set out to offer to the Church, to the Salesian congregation, and to the wider civil society, in all of which ambits the Salesians trained in Christi Jyoti College were made capable of rendering quality spiritual, intellectual, and material contributions. And this has already been indicated in the various presentations that were made. Let me take this opportunity also to thank all those who have been instrumental for the realization of this program, especially the members of the Istituto Storico Salesiano. In fact, it was Father Zimniak, the Secretary di Coordinamento, who suggested to me that we present this at the university level. Then also particularly to Father Henry Dominic Salvaraj, who was the moderator of this session. The authorities of the university, particularly Don Boscvo Andrea, the Rector Magnificus, Don Ochoviak Jaroslav Joseph, the Secretary General, those responsible for the Ufficio nella Comunicazione Sviluppo, and everyone else who either by their presence, words of encouragement, or through significant or not so significant yet very friendly gestures, showed their interest in and appreciation for today's event. Thanks to one and all, especially to all those who have contributed with their presentations for the success of this event. God bless all of us, God bless all our works, and may God continue to bless abundantly the Salesian congregation and Christi Jyoti College. Have a nice evening.
So at the end, I would like to thank you, dear Father Thomas, on behalf of all the participants here gathered in this hall and those who are following the event online, for your valuable contribution to the history of the Salesian congregation. Before ending the movie called KJC, there are two announcements. You are most welcome to take part in the refreshment arranged outside the hall. And Father Thomas' new book on Christi Jyoti is available for purchase at that very special price of 10 euros only, exclusively for today, as you walk out of the hall. You're welcome to profit the offer given to you by the Institute of Salesian History for this occasion. Once again, thank you. See you again. Thank you. Shall we have one? Can I ask all of you to come in front for a group photo, please? It will be nice. Yeah. All of us can take part, please. Facciamo una foto, per favore. Sì, tutti insieme.